Force Unleashed. What a game. I often bundled this game with X-Men Origins Wolverine for introducing me to action games in general, something that I would come to wrap my video game interests as a whole around. An agile character that can slip around the battlefield and juggle enemies at will while also having access to these ridiculous powers just scratched the itch I didn't know that I had up until that point. The force powers that you have access to in this game are something to behold, as I'm sure you know, but what you might not know is that this game was focused on several different things in its conceptual phases. The team spent a year or so whittling down hundreds of game concepts that they've come up with down to only a few. These included a Wookiee superhero, a gadget-based bounty hunter experience, and even a Darth Maul-focused game. But George Lucas had to be consulted on each concept before it was given the green light to go any further, and after the team had thrown together some impressive looking pre-visualizations of a Jedi-focused game where the destructive power of the Force is at your fingertips, he was sold. The plan was to launch an entirely new branch of expanded universe material with this game at the center. This included 2 tie-in novels, action figures, a comic book, and a whole lot more that would bring the so-called Force Unleashed project to life. But I never read or followed anything other than the game, so that's what we're going to focus on today. As a kid, I played this game more times than I can recall. I got every achievement on the Xbox 360 version, unlocked all the costumes you can get, I got every lightsaber crystal, the whole shebang. The Force Unleashed was the first Star Wars game I fell in love with. Not the first Star Wars game I played. That honor would go to Demolition, and f*** me if anyone fell in love with Demolition. But until Jedi Fallen Order, this was the definition of what a Star Wars game could and should be in my eyes. I haven't played it in a few years, but it has been catching my eye as I scroll up and down my Steam library, ignoring all the games that I haven't actually played yet, so why not? Just for clarification, I'll be playing the PC port for this video, but the Steam version wasn't optimized properly for modern hardware. Tell me if that sounds familiar. So I took the liberty of installing a few mods that brought the frame rate up to 60 and fixed a lot of loading and audio hiccups it had a tendency towards. It did cause some lighting errors here and there and a few crashes on top of that, but it was never anything demoralizing thanks to a generous autosave feature. If you're curious, I have left the links to these graphical modifications in the description, and with that out of the way, let's jump into Star Wars: The Force Unleashed. For this adventure, the player is in control of Starkiller, or as he's called in the novelizations, Galen Merrick. But that's really lame sounding, so I'm gonna stick with Starkiller. A Jedi orphan taken in by Darth Vader after he killed his father right in front of him. Through years of training the boy to become a Jedi assassin, Vader tasks him with his final test before he can fulfill his destiny and help him overthrow Emperor Palpatine. With the help of his trusty sparring droid Proxy and hot new pilot Juno Eclipse, Galen tracks down can't do it, sounds too dumb. Starkiller tracks down and eliminates General Rom Koda, a clone general turned Jedi master who led a private militia of soldiers, Kazdan Paratus, a Jedi outcast who spent his days in a temple made of garbage, and Shaak Ti, a Jedi master who protects the planet of Felucia. After all of the targets have been eliminated, he returns to Vader, eager to fulfill the destiny that he's been working his whole life to achieve. Only for the Emperor to enter the room and a lightsaber to enter Starkiller's back. Sometime after being ejected into space, a droid can be seen recovering the body. The Emperor's spies discovered that Vader had taken an apprentice behind his back, and Vader claims that killing him was the only way to get back into good favor. Now that the Emperor has seen his death firsthand, an attack from the shadows is a perfect next move. Vader instructs Starkiller to gather up allies from across the galaxy, create a force that can truly oppose the Empire, and then the two of them can destroy the Emperor together. Reluctantly, he accepts, but there's obviously some conflicting feelings swirling in his head after the whole, But against his better judgment and after rescuing Juno, Starkiller sets off to build his army. First, he tracks down General Koda, who survived their encounter and now spends his days wallowing at the bottom of a bottle in Cloud City. He lost his eyesight after the encounter and has become quite depressed, but tags along anyway. Then we set off for Kashyyyk to rescue Princess Leia Organa from a crazed Imperial general. This puts Starkiller in the good graces of Leia's father, Bail Organa, and rescuing the guy from Shaak Ti's crazed apprentice doesn't hurt either. With the bones of a rebel alliance now assembled, Starkiller demonstrates to the galaxy that the Empire is vulnerable by grabbing a whole-ass Star Destroyer and pulling it straight out of orbit with the Force. This might be one of the coolest set pieces in the game, but good lord is it annoying to play. The Rebel Alliance then secretly meets to discuss their first major strike against the Empire, with Bail Organa to fund the rebellion, this guy to do something, this lady to do something else, Starkiller to lead them, and General Coda to back them up. The Empire had better watch out.
FBI, open up!
Vader busts through the door with an entire Imperial invasion, taking the rebel leaders into custody and leaving Starkiller for dead once again. After a pick-me-up and a pep talk from Juno, Starkiller rushes to the newly constructed Death Star to correct the mistake he made and rescue his new friends. And after absolutely wrecking Vader's like, "Oh my god, this dude about to die!" breaking into the throne room and staring down the Emperor as he tortures the rebels. The game then leaves the final decision up to the player. The canonical good ending sees Starkiller rushing to the aid of his friends and stopping the Emperor long enough for them to make their escape, sacrificing himself to give the galaxy a chance at peace. Coda and Juno are seen reminiscing as he says that the spark of light within Starkiller was always her. But the bad ending is triggered when the player jumps down to finish Vader off for good. By the time Starkiller rejoins the rebels, Coda is dead, and as he grieves, Palpatine pulls Juno and the Rogue Shadow down into the room, killing Juno, the Apprentice, and the rebels all at once.
No!
In the aftermath, the Emperor is shown reconstructing Starkiller in a mechanical body, asking his new apprentice to rise as the cyborg Sith screams. This narrative isn't anything particularly amazing, but I think it's solid enough. It's fairly easy to predict misguided hero becomes the hero he was destined to become story, but to me, what elevates this one are the performances. It certainly could be the fact that I've played through this game more times than I can count, but these performances are just embedded into my memory. So much so that one of the game's quotes finds its way into my typical speech all the time. During the escape mission, in an attempt to eliminate any witnesses, Proxy sets the station on a collision course with a nearby star. In response to Starkiller's reaction, Proxy says this golden line.
Proxy, did you launch the pods?
Of course, Master. It pays to be thorough.
It's not even that great of a line, honestly, but it's just stuck with me. Nostalgia probably had something to do with it, but out of all the performances, I think Sam Witwer as the Apprentice is just hands down the best. Unironically, this guy puts on such a great show with tons of memorable lines.
The Emperor's enemies are still scared. I am just now earning their trust. If I am ever discovered talking to you, if they even suspect my past, all that will be destroyed.
No offense to Cameron, but I remember having a much stronger initial attachment to Starkiller than I did with Cal in Fallen Order. Just saying, and something that I found out while researching for this video, Sam has apparently been the voice for Darth Maul for his extended universe appearances since this game, even in all the LEGO games and throughout Maul's focus in the animated shows. Also, he is quite the handsome man, but kinda seems like a dork on the inside.
No, Stormtrooper, out of the way. I gotta save you guys. You're my boys.
Star Wars fans out there. Oh, no, they will. Yeah, and
Out of here.
The physics.
You're fired.
But back on track, the narrative might not be the most intricate story ever created, but this game was very technically groundbreaking when it was created. So much so that the development process was apparently a nightmare. I explained at the top how they had to pitch several concepts to George, finally finding one he was on board with thanks to those previs shots. But now the team had to figure out how to make this vision come to life. To accomplish this, not only did LucasArts develop a proprietary game engine codenamed Ronin for brand new consoles no less, the team wanted the force you wield in-game to be like nothing you've seen in a video game before. So they thought it would be best to utilize 3 different third-party AI systems to make the game feel as authentic to Star Wars as possible. The Havoc physics engine was a very powerful and common tool among games released during the 7th generation of consoles. Havoc allowed for numerous real-time physics object collisions in-game. The way that barrels, crates, vines, beams all collide and behave with accurately simulated weight and gravity can be attributed to this powerful physics engine. The second tool is called Euphoria, biomechanical artificial intelligence. In general terms, this means that characters will act to preserve their own lives with physics-based movements. If something sudden happens, they have behaviors that can trigger where they'll reach out for help, reach out and grab onto other objects, they can dive out of the way of incoming objects, and generally behave in more realistic ways. And then finally, to cap off this cauldron of systems is DMM, or Digital Molecular Matter. This allows for more believable material simulations when interacting with objects. While things like plant life will wave and bounce back, more destructible environments will break realistically. Thanks to DMM, glass will shatter, wood will crack and splinter, and metal will creak and bend. Where a lot of the production troubles came from was getting these three very different systems to play nice with each other under the hood. And from what I've seen while researching, it almost spelled the end of the project several times. Just to give you an example, if I was to pick up this object, Havoc is doing most of the computational lifting, telling the game how heavy it is, how fast it's going, etc. But when I throw it at this stormtrooper, now all of a sudden Havoc has to communicate with Euphoria's AI. And it's also not hard to imagine a situation where a Euphoria-powered enemy grabs onto a Havoc physics object, but then the player smashes them both into a DMM surface, mixing all of the AIs together in a theoretical gumbo pot of potential errors and problems. But against all odds, the game came out relatively unscathed, with some decent visuals to boot. Backdrops are pretty consistently interesting to look at, reflective surfaces make the interiors of Imperial stations come to life, and the motion blur attached to Starkiller's model gives some attacks a great sense of speed. However, unfortunately, as was the style at the time, a lot of the Force Unleashed's play areas look kinda ugly. Very washed out, with a lot of areas that could have benefited from some extra color here and there. The 360 era was known for games that go for this more realistic and grounded style, but this is the same series that's known for big colorful laser swords and weird aliens. I think a bit more stylization would have been nice to see. But okay, now that we've gotten the story side and the tech side all sorted out, I think I'm ready to talk about the actual game part now. The Force Unleashed is a Star Wars action game through and through. The objective is to make it to the end of each linear level while taking down enemies that stand in your way, completing optional objectives for upgrade points, and finding hidden Jedi holocrons for extra goodies. Defeating enemies rewards experience for level ups and the acquiring of skill points for different stat increases, force power upgrades, and lightsaber combos. Combat abilities are pretty varied, all things considered. Each attack is clearly designated by a button on the controller. From the perspective of an Xbox pad, X is your lightsaber combo, B is force push, Y is lightning, and A is jump, obviously. Left bumper is a dash that's great for getting around the battlefield. Right bumper is a lock-on that actually does a really good job of keeping you on top of one enemy. And the dash has some fun utility when locked onto a target. One that I learned on this playthrough, in fact, is this dash charge. If you're locked on and dash while in the air, you can zip right to an enemy. It might not be the most effective as an attack, but it is great for getting back in their face. Right trigger is force grip, what you use to pick up objects and sling them around, and left trigger blocks, as well as bringing up a menu of force abilities that can be used with the corresponding face button. It's then up to the player to experiment with these different functions to make their own combos and strategies on the battlefield. And that leads to probably my biggest letdown. The combat is pretty limited. There aren't really any combos or juggling in the Force Unleashed. It's fun, but in a more novel way. To be fair, they weren't trying to build an intricate combat system. The team went through 15 levels of hell putting all these simulation technologies in this game, and that's what they want you to use and have fun with, damn it. These destructive force abilities are the bread and butter of Starkiller's moveset. All those technologies working alongside the toolkit they gave Starkiller makes for one of the most fun sandbox games in recent memory. After unlocking some more lightsaber combos, you can begin mixing other buttons into your standard combo. I'm a personal sucker for the Sith Flurry Rush, which happens when you pause slightly before the next input. The lightsaber swings get a bit more stylish, but I don't know if the damage of the combo actually changes at all, it just looks cool. Throwing lightning into the combos can be devastating against certain enemies, especially these giant robot Imperials. Throwing a force push input into a combo can also have some entertaining effects with moves like the saber swing. And at the end of a combo, you can do this to get an aerial rush attack, which can finish in a few different ways. One of which, this cool as hell grapple, again, I didn't know about until this very playthrough. However, the force grip is the main dish compared to these simple appetizers. It is the most devastating move the player has, and for good reason. It can completely immobilize bigger enemies for a time and deal huge damage to mini-bosses. The ways in which you can essentially torture the smaller enemies with it is partly sadistic, but mostly really f***ing fun. You can turn objects or even other enemies into flying lightning bombs, watch enemies writhe in pain after being impaled by your lightsaber, slam them against the floor, slam them against that wall, cave their skull in with this thing, crash them through all of that stuff. I doubt it will ever get old. There are very few gaming experiences that are as genuinely fun as using the force grip in this game. But again, that's kinda where combat stops. The appeal is with the spectacle this destruction can breed, but the depth of it just isn't really there. Now, you can be like me and attempt to play this game like 3D Zelda to get some sort of depth out of it, using the lock-on feature and the dash as a makeshift dodge roll, but this is more or less just me playing around out of a sense of wanting more, wishing that the combat was something more focused on the actual dueling and less about seeing how far I can throw this poor unfortunate soul. Variety does help with this problem. The enemy cast is solid overall, and I think there's a healthy number of goons to battle against. In the main campaign, the apprentice travels to several different locations, each with their own unique baddies to encounter. Some have very unique weaknesses, most of which are lightning. Seriously, I think Euphoria tells every single enemy to spaz out and just fall over when they get lightninged, which I guess would make a degree of sense, but it makes Force Lightning one of the first things I max out due to how utterly helpful it is. Sorry, back on track. The unique melee enemies are ones that always get me itching for an encounter, because it's funny to hold a ranged enemy at bay and watch him try to muster up the strength to shoot you, but fighting another melee user tickles that dueling itch I'm known to have. Mini-bosses like AT-ATs, Force Guardians, and Bull Rancors are great, but feel a little clunky when I'm trying to fight them normally. Like, I don't want to say cheap because they're definitely not, but these fights boil down to waiting for my lightning to recharge a lot of the time to end it quickly. They all have moves that are really powerful, but not a one of them can be blocked or countered. I think some AT-ATs can fire regular blaster bolts to be reflected back, but that's where it stops. Everything else just has to be avoided, so your offensive options become kinda limited in that way. Rancors can be sorta stun locked with this lightning combo, but the Force Guardians have no such counterattack methods. I personally always felt like these guys should be dropping debris and rock after they take certain amounts of damage, giving the player ammunition to turn the tide of the fight the better they initially perform. But the highlights are always the Jedi encounters for me. They may not be the most amazing Jedi duels out there, but they're still pretty fun. They basically always become a game of waiting for the opportunity to use the Force grip, so you can rush over there and get an impale or two off for big damage before they get up. The little beam struggles are neat to see too, and I love the unique animation each character gets when you win their lightsaber clash. Especially Shock T's, because it looks like something you would straight up see on a World Star video. And oh man, speaking of unique animations, this game and its QTEs are one of the main reasons I love playing it so much. No joke, the flashy ways in which Starkiller finished each of these fights off is enough to keep my brain looking forward to the next encounter, as silly as that sounds. I can't help it that these look so cool. And you've gotta love how they animated failure states for every single one of these button prompts. It kinda makes it less tense when you know there's literally no way you can fail these things, but I think I'm enjoying them the way they were intended, as a visual treat. With my absolute favorite being the boss fight against Proxy at the end of Imperial Raxus Prime, where after using all of the previous bosses against you, he turns into Darth Maul. This fight is just such a banger. The Imperial Royal Guards are a lot of fun, especially since they can use Force powers too, but they don't ever last long enough to be fun toys to play with. Actually, you know what? That's a great visualization of the game's gameplay loop. Think about a cat playing with their favorite toy, how they paw at it, maybe hit it around a little. That's what the player is in this game. Using every physics object to knock the enemies over like bowling pins has this playfully sadistic air about it to me. Like the goal really isn't to make it to the end of the level, but see how many things you can make go splat. I will give this game some credit for its replay value. While the levels might not be the most layered or intricate things to run through, there are tons of secrets to make you go back. Temporary power-ups such as health steal are put right before tough encounters, so knowing the locations of these things can be the difference between life and death. Not to mention the Jedi holocrons that unlock extra content as well. Some of them only reward you with extra experience, but there are tons of saber crystal variations to find, with even more slight variations to those like the compressed and unstable crystals, and even the coveted black lightsaber that's hidden in the final level of the game. Not gonna lie, I don't think this is the coolest one you can find. It's alright, but I much prefer pairing lightsaber crystals with one of the many extra costumes you can unlock for some interesting what-if scenarios. I mean, I do like how Starkiller gets a new outfit for literally every single mission, not just because I really like the designs of some of these costumes, but it also lends an authenticity to the missions he goes on. But I was more so talking about the extra non-canon costumes. Jango Fett with a black lightsaber? That's pretty dope. Mace Windu with a purple lightsaber? That feels right. Qui-Gon Jinn with a green lightsaber. It's just fun to play dress up in this game, what can I say? But my favorite combination, for some reason, don't ask me why, has always been the Stormtrooper costume with an unstable red crystal. Again, I do not know why. It's just something about an all-powerful Sith Stormtrooper has stuck in my brain since I was a kid, and I think my adult self just f***s with this as an aesthetic now. What can I say? The Force Unleashed also had a round of DLC featuring a few legitimate what-if scenarios, and the first honestly feels like something that got cut from the main campaign, rather than an add-on that started development after the fact. Under the recommendation of General Coda, Starkiller travels into the Jedi Temple to face off against his inner demons, which manifests as a projection of himself. The projection swaps between the costumes that you get from completing both endings of the actual game, and they have unique movesets too. But the level has some pretty clever design as well. The introduction to the level sees the player dropping down from the Rogue Shadow and slamming into this platform with tons of stormtroopers on it. There's a section of Jedi trials you have to overcome, but it's just some basic move this object here stuff. And of course, the ending QTE tickles me, so I give it a thumbs up. But the next two DLC missions follow the events of the bad ending, where the apprentice is reborn into the Sith cyborg and becomes the Emperor's apprentice. First, traveling to Tatooine in search of 2 droids.
Oh, Star Wars! I love Star Wars!
It starts off pretty strong by making the player blast a Jawa sandcrawler off the side of a mountain. Starkiller then meets with Jabba and gets sent to the Rancor pit. Shortly after some fan service by way of a returning proxy, Boba Fett shows up for a very easy fight where he's killed off. Then finally ending with a battle against Ben Kenobi, once as flesh and blood before he shoved up the Millennium Falcon's behind and then comes back as a Force Ghost, which I'm not sure makes a ton of sense. And then the final DLC sees the apprentice becoming the Master, donning armor very reminiscent of Vader himself, as well as setting his sights on Hoth and the rebels hiding there. This is definitely my favorite DLC mission. Platforming through the underground cave systems, tearing through the rebel base, having a duel with Luke and corrupting him to turn to the dark side was so dumb and cool. And I know it's getting annoying at this point, but just look at how cool this is, dude. Now, while these 2 DLC chapters are a fun time, I particularly like all the brand new enemies we get to face off with, and the bosses are great additions. There is a particular level of cheese to them, like it comes off as edgy fanfiction more than anything. And if that's all you take it as, I think they work brilliantly. Seeing Luke Skywalker shoot red lightning from his hand is just plain silly, but undeniably entertaining. The moment you start trying to take this seriously is the moment you've missed the point. I think this is best illustrated by the fact that the Emperor's secret cyborg apprentice can dropkick Ben Kenobi's Force Ghost in Mos Eisley. That is just straight up funny. Unfortunately, this would be the last peep out of the original Force Unleashed game until the sequel was released in 2016. But the game did see a release on last generation systems as well as a DS version. And in the year of our Lord 2022, surprising everyone, Nintendo announced a release of the Wii version coming to the Switch on April 20th of 2022. So I figured it could be a fun idea to wrap both console versions together into one video, wouldn't you say? Now, from what I read, the PS2 and Wii versions are extremely identical except for the Wii's obvious motion-controlled mayhem. So other than that, let's jump in. As far as the story goes, the main beats are all hit. Starkiller is abducted as a boy on Kashyyyk, defeats all 3 Jedi to earn Vader's trust, is trolled by his master, then immediately repaired, gains the trust of the newly formed rebels, gets punked by Vader again, and then goes on a suicide mission to rescue his new buddies. We still even have the choice at the end with all the consequences intact. However, the levels themselves are what see some differences. So you remember how I said that the Jedi Temple DLC feels like it was cut from the main game? Well, looks like I was kinda right. After a couple of the missions, the apprentice will semi-frequently return to the Jedi Temple for some frankly arbitrary reasons. It feels like it's to draw the runtime out if you want my honest opinion, but that's just me. On top of the frequent Jedi Temple pit stops, we also have a few other extra missions. One that involves saving Cloud City from a Jar Jar bounty hunter to gain the favor of one of these rebels, a boss fight against Starkiller's dad during one of the trips to the Jedi Temple, and a battle against a Mandalorian chief. They were all pretty neat to see, and some of the regular missions have a little extra meat on their bones this time. A junk master that has to be dealt with on Rexus Prime added a surprise to that level. The tutorial mission on Kashyyyk has a much more sinister vibe to it. It's set at night, and the assault feels a lot more like a terrible act on the Empire's behalf, with way more cinematic flair to give these cutscenes some identity. And every one of the Jedi Temple revisits has a boss fight against some other Jedi. But to bring the curtain down, I really think that's all this version of the game can claim as an advantage. I'm sorry, but this one didn't do it for me. I know the Wii and PS2 aren't nearly as powerful as the 360 and PS3, but I've played the original version too much to see this as anything other than a downgrade. After practically studying the HD versions of these cinematics for so long, to then be subjected to these, it's just really easy to see the flaws. They use some of the same voice lines from the HD version, but the animation quality is just far more limited, leading to scenes like the first time Starkiller meets Juno, hung to dry. We missed the introduction of Proxy as his confidant and all the believable little facial details. The performance capture that made the HD game scenes come to life are missing, and it feels lesser because of it. This version does a better job of playing up the suspense of Coda not knowing that Starkiller was the one who fought him at the beginning of the game, which is legitimately cool. I don't think the HD game leaned into that enough personally, but they often do it with these weak as hell extra lines. I don't know what the deal was with the actors when they turned in these pickups. Maybe they were tired, the contract money didn't hit, they didn't eat a proper breakfast, I don't know. But almost every line of dialogue that wasn't in the HD version first is stiff, flat, and does the limited animation no favors.
The Emperor's enemies are still scared. I am just now earning their trust. If I'm ever discovered talking to you, if they even suspect my past, all that will be destroyed.
The game as a whole doesn't look bad for a Wii game that's been touched up, but it does show its age from time to time. The particle effects were decent enough, the little experience points that swirl around you could have been more transparent if I had to nitpick, and the visual effect for the Force was a bit much, but these are nothing I'll lose sleep over. The way that smaller details draw in and draw out at such close range is really distracting though. I'm honestly curious if this is how it was on the original hardware and why it wasn't changed for this re-release. I saw a few areas that made me go, oh yeah, this was definitely a PS2 game at one point. The models aren't that bad, they look fine for lower detail versions of these characters and enemies. It's just really distracting when they're supposed to be hamming up the drama, and it's so obvious that the hardware at the time couldn't handle it.
This girl's baby is ugly. It's an ugly child.
And along with the presentation being kind of a letdown, combat didn't fare much better. Most of the base abilities were kept for this version: a lightsaber combo, force lightning, force push, force grip, repulse, saber throw. Lightning shield is missing though, RIP. With the differences being where I started to get a little mixed up. Well, first of all, the configuration of the abilities had a few wires in my brain crossed, but thankfully every single button on the controller can be assigned and reassigned however you see fit, and I had the HD version's control scheme working before long. This is legitimately a wonderful feature, probably the highest praise I have for this game. No joke, everyone else needs to start taking notes. Interestingly, some of the abilities operate a bit differently, with the biggest hit being Force Grip is not as much fun to use. It is impressive that the team created a physics system separately for this version that works as well as it does, but it's not Havoc. I feel bad for even saying that, but it's just how I feel. Trying to throw objects just doesn't feel as good in this game. You can't even lift objects higher or lower, only forward and backwards and side to side. The Force Push and Grip share an input as well, which I never really got used to. You tap the button to send out a Force Push and hold it down to grab objects. Charging a Force Push was cut out of the combat completely and relegated to context-sensitive environmental interaction. But I discovered towards the end of my playthrough that if you Force Push with debris around you, the objects will behave as if they've been thrown. This was cool to learn, but expectedly odd coming from the HD game. Saber combat is dreadful though. There's no sort of combo to the input, instead a constant flailing that continues until you stop pressing the button or splice in lightning or force buttons into the chain. And I only found use for one or two of those. This one that can knock enemies down, and this force slam because it's the closest I can get to a grapple in this game. No Sith Flurry, no launchers, no mixing force and lightning moves into the same combo, nothing. It made encounters with all of the melee enemies extremely tedious. These Lance Troopers have really cool designs. I would have loved to fight them with a decent combat system, but here it's just... So if you've been with this channel for a long time, you'll remember the Avatar: The Last Airbender retrospective I did in 2019. The second game, Burning Earth, had a bad problem where boss enemies would just not take damage while I was attacking them. It was really unclear why it was happening, and it made the fights really frustrating to play because it was impossible to tell what I was doing wrong. It's the same exact feeling I had playing The Force Unleashed for the Switch. Enemies would just take saber swings in a bowl with some milk and keep trucking. I couldn't tell when they were blocking it, why they were blocking it, or even if they were blocking it. This was every melee enemy in the game too. It got to the point where I started running past the enemy encounters because I didn't want to sit there and mash the Y button over and over. It was either that or some sort of cheese tactic like throwing them into a bottomless pit one by one. I was surprised at how powerful a regular force push ends up being here. It was one of the best attacks to use against common enemies. One blast would take a group out and I could continue moving on. I got a lot of mileage out of this Maelstrom move where all the enemies get sucked into this vortex and then explode out. It's like a better Force Repulse, but it was great for taking out groups of the annoying melee enemies, so I pumped a lot of points into it. Force Lightning was okay for draining boss health bars, I guess, but it felt ineffective due to the lack of common enemy health bars. This level design also suffers due to the hardware limitations. Instead of the large, sprawling areas with secrets to find around every corner, we have linear hallway after linear hallway. Maybe a room big enough to fit a few enemies, but that's about where it ends. It's odd how some holocrons just appear after you've destroyed certain things in the environment, as opposed to the well-placed holocrons that took a good eye to spot, not a destructive obligation to interact with every possible thing on every wall. And I think that's what a lot of it comes down to, huh? The HD version isn't a good game because of any incredible combat system, it's a good game because of how it feels. The exploration and discovery of these secrets in the levels and how to use the abilities to reach them. They absolutely nailed the feeling of pretty much every action. It's all animated brilliantly with wonderful visual and sound effects, but in this version, they simply couldn't achieve that. They did their absolute best with what they were given, I'm sure of it, but at the end of the day, why would I go buy a 6-pack of Dr. Thunder when we have a 2-liter of Dr. Pepper in the fridge? As I've explained, the HD version is no masterpiece, but it also holds a very special place in my heart. I'm biased, what can I say? I even love all the faults this game brings to the table, like the stupid unintentional humor that you get from scenes like this. Why did the Emperor just look at Vader like, yep, and then walk away? Man, it's dumb stuff like that that makes me love it, and I don't mean to completely dump on the Switch version. It's got its own identity and it's doing its own thing. While I can't personally forgive it for doing things like making Starkiller hold his lightsaber the right way, it has a multiplayer duel mode if that's something that interests you. There are several different characters to unlock, and I mean like a lot. I dragged my buddy Nick over here to do a few matches, and I think we both agree that we gave about 15 minutes of our lives that we won't be getting back. The same issues that plagued the Jedi duels in the campaign plague these as well. Locking your opponent in a corner with lightsaber flailing is a very viable strategy. Being unsure of why a certain attack works this time but not this time is a very common occurrence. Every quote-unquote character has the exact same moves, except there are stat differences that set them apart. Some characters can swing a lightsaber really hard, some can hit extra hard with the Force, and Shakti has a really strong connection to the Wi-Fi. There are power-ups that appear on the battlefield like invincibility, unlimited Force energy, calling for reinforcements, etc. Again, I don't think I classify this as a selling point, but I could totally see two kids having a good time with this small distraction. And this version's even got those cheat codes that you can use to unlock the extra costumes and go back through the campaign missions and play those what-if scenarios, but it's got too much of a visual downgrade and lackluster gameplay for me to recommend it. The HD version isn't perfect by any means, but I do think that it's a fun game to casually run through. The Force powers and the impressive chain reactions they can cause is the real fun. If that's something that sounds entertaining to you, then I would recommend tracking down some means of playing it. But as for the newly released Switch port, which is a shame that they chose to release this version of the game instead of the obviously better version of the game for the Switch, but even still, part of me wants to tell you to go out and buy this game because there's the potential that this re-release could inspire them to make a Force Unleashed 3, but I can't in good faith tell you to go buy this game when there is a catalog of better software that you could get for the Switch. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. I appreciate it more than you could ever know. It was kind of just a happy accident that I was making a video on the HD version of Force Unleashed when the Switch version just so happened to be releasing the next week, so that was pretty cool. And as for what's next, we've got a first for this channel by way of a collaboration video. And then after that, I'm really jazzed about VR again thanks to the announcement of Bone Lab. For the newcomers around here, I'm a huge fan of VR, and Boneworks is mostly responsible, so I'll probably be getting back into some VR shortly. I hope you all enjoy the videos enough to stick around for that if you care to. I know I'd love to have you, but anyway, I appreciate you for watching. So thanks for stopping by, and have a great day.